Welcome to part 2 of our quarantine special. I'm Ben and joined by my friends Zach and Jason as we debate various topics related to pop culture, politics, history, and more. And at the end of this episode, we'll also shout out some causes and creators that we'd like to support during this coronavirus pandemic. So, again, thanks for listening, and stay safe out there, and enjoy our nonsense. Yeah. Okay. So let's. I guess Jason, go ahead with the prompt, and I have an idea, but go ahead and say what it is again.
Okay. So the prompt is: what single reform would do the most to improve U.S. politics?
Okay, and like you said, this is kind of a more of a process thing than a politics thing.
We're not looking for something like Medicare for all or end the war in Afghanistan, which are kind of the outcome of political deliberations. We're talking about the processes by which we hold elections or finance elections, things like that.
Okay, so I have an idea, and you're probably going to win this argument because like whatever you picked is something that you've probably thought about a lot and you probably have a lot to say on both subjects that we choose. But I'm gonna pick something that I think will be an interesting argument, even if it's maybe not the best one. And that is something I saw in a recent article about potential things that might happen due to the coronavirus pandemic. And that is allowing the U.S. Congress to conduct business while members remain in their home states.
Ooh, okay. So my pick is going to be redistricting reform. So redistricting is when the boundaries of constituencies that elect. Okay, yeah. Just in case any readers didn't know. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, listeners, but my pick would have been something I talked with Trevor about recently when we were waiting for the Screaming Females concert earlier this month, but before the world was ending. He said something like he read an article where they just kept expanding the House of Representatives as population grew based on the original population figure of how many people one representative should represent. So I would say abolish the Senate and expand the House of Representatives would have been my pick. So that we have a truly representative Congress. Okay.
All right. So I guess I'll start with mine. So this is something I was recently reading a article in Politico where they brought together 30 or so different thinkers and experts and writers and had them all talk about how different aspects of society and government and technology and culture and whatever might change as a result of coronavirus. And of course a lot of things had to do with we can work remotely and educate remotely, and one person advanced the idea of we could have Congress work remotely, and it was actually a pretty compelling idea, because there's a couple reasons. One is you have a lot of complaints that these politicians, they just go to Washington and they become creatures of Washington and forget about their home state, and they're more devoted to the party than to their constituents. And a lot of people say, the way to combat that would be term limits, but having everyone separate would actually be a really good way to combat that as well, because for one, you're closer to the people of your home state, so you're more attuned to their concerns, and secondly, you're farther away from K Street, so the lobbyists can still get to you, but it's a lot harder for them to be okay, we need to get to all 50 states, like you probably have some lobbying from concerns in your own state, but it's like that's not quite so bad because it's at least those are the people you're supposed to be representing. Whereas, like, it's in Washington, like if they're all in Washington, you can just round them up into a big banquet and lobby them all at once. Whereas if they're all separate from Washington, like that, they're closer to their own constituents, they're farther away from the central forces of lobbying, and so it would be a really interesting way to see if we could kind of minimize some of that influence of the big groupthink of partisan and corporate interests that happens in Washington, and kind of have people that are elected to represent us like think on a more individual and statewide level. Obviously you'd want to have things where you still gathered in Washington to conduct business, but not requiring it, and having some time for Congress people to work in their home state and get things done in their home state and just vote on things remotely would be a really interesting change that I think could have some pretty interesting benefits if it worked.
So the reason why redistricting matters so much is because a lot of U.S. politics is conducted by people who are elected in the down ballot races. So much of the American political system and the American political media is focused only on what the president is doing, whereas Congress and your state legislatures are incredibly important. And we currently have a system whereby we have politicians deciding the political boundaries that are used to elect themselves and other people who they are trying to elect given their own personal partisan interests. And this leads to the worst conflict of interest imaginable, because you have systems where a majority of the population, say 60%, votes for one party, and the other party gets the majority of representatives. That makes no sense, and it's perfectly legal, and it is what happens when you have people who can engineer these maps that are geared towards electing people from their party regardless of the interests of democracy. And so at that point, public opinion matters much less, because it doesn't matter that the other party got more votes. You won the districts. So that is just madness. On top of that, a lot of these districts are drawn to be politically safe, so that it is a Republican district only or a Democratic district only, meaning that the other party has virtually no chance of ever winning an election. That completely eliminates the chance for the other party's voters to have an effect on who represents them. And it pushes our politics towards the extremes of both parties, because members in those districts are worried about being primaried by someone, who has more extreme views than they do within their party, rather than worrying about the general election battle. And those concerns really make it just, literally you're having the players rig the game. It would be as if, whichever team at halftime, was ahead in the football game, got to decide who the ref was going to be for the rest of the game. It's like, no, that's not how this should work. So, yeah, it is it is just madness having this system where people are scared to work across the aisle because they're scared of being primaried in their super safe districts that were drawn by politically minded state legislators who only care about electing their party and do not care about actually representing the will of the voters. And we can and should take that power away from politicians and give it to some sort of neutral, nonpartisan board of geographers and representatives of various citizen interest groups, judges, just neutral third parties who can draw these lines with respect to communities of interest that actually reflect the will of the people as expressed by the votes that are cast in an election. It makes absolutely no sense to let the politicians decide. So let the politicians choose their voters rather than the voters choosing their politicians. So Ben's argument is a good one. I particularly like that he chose not to have it be that way all the time. I like that he acknowledged that sometimes you do have to gather together in-person coalition building requires you to meet with people. It's a little hard to build, gangs of 8 across Skype teleconferencing. The reason why it's not nearly as powerful as redistricting at solving the problems of American politics include that, at least one of your arguments was that it'd bring politicians closer to the people they're representing. And hopefully that would, decrease some of the partisan instincts in Washington. One of the big reasons why we're so divided as a country is because, or one of the reasons why our Congress is so divided is because our country is so divided. I think that just changing the location of where politicians are when they vote sometimes would help, but I don't think it would solve the partisan problems, because a lot of the bitter disputes we have in politics are because we are bitterly divided among voters and citizens. So it wouldn't be a cure-all. As for lobbyist interests, I think a lot of that comes through the campaign finance system. But yeah, I mean, it would be interesting having them be lobbied by local interests more often, even if they are, local corporations. But local corporations are where you have a lot of problem with the industrial military complex and other interest groups that kind of spread themselves out geographically. Certainly the military-industrial complex has factories in all the different districts, and he cries foul anytime anyone tries to get our bloated military budget. And sometimes the local interests are producing bombs that are dropped over Yemen, or or polluters damaging the environment, or what have you. They employ a lot of people and have a lot of political clout, but sometimes the devil or the devil closer to home is more devilish than it's given credit for. But yeah, I think reforming redistricting would go a long way towards fixing our political system if people actually could credibly believe that the party that got the most votes actually got the most politicians elected in their local and congressional races.
Okay, yeah. So I realized that Jason just dropped a huge amount of knowledge and thought there that I don't really have much chance to counter effectively, but I'll continue briefly for the sake of discussion. So, point 1, Republicans are just better at geography. But yeah, no, I think, yeah, it would be like, I wish there was, like, I had a more thought out way to really enhance the benefits of the separation, because I think, you know, state politics, does, like, you see some interesting things, like, states that pretty much always vote one way in national elections will have a little more back and forth in terms of, like, oh, Kansas will never vote for a Democratic president, but they'll vote for a Democratic governor, or something like that.
And Massachusetts is the same way, by the way. They almost always vote for the Democrat in the presidential, but they've elected a surprising number of Republican governors.
Yeah, so it would be interesting to see if you could enhance those localizing effects to kind of make make there be a little more back and forth between, a little more competitiveness between the parties. Just the fact that you're enhancing the way that your representatives are more invested in their local constituents than in national party politics and national corporate interests. But yeah, I mean, I think your argument, like, you just laid out so many ways that, like, the politicians being able to set their own districts is horribly corrupt, and the fact that, like, the way that the districts are drawn to be safe districts, like, has much more of a polarizing influence than you would at first think, and that is probably one of the main ways that really drives that polarizing force. Like, yeah, I don't think I could really come back from that, because obviously you put a lot of thought into this, and I just pulled something out of my ass, but it was an interesting discussion.
So yeah, Jason was definitely going to win that. Like, Ben, your opening point of, like, the interesting effects of politicians being more accountable to their local interests and to their constituents if they had to work from home a lot was really interesting, but then Jason just dropped such a knowledge bomb there that there was no coming back from that. Mm-hmm. Like, unless you just completely destroyed how like the importance of redistricting with some argument that didn't exist, that it wasn't happening.
Yeah,
it just wasn't happening.
Like,
Jason's argument was so good, it was almost just a knockout.
Yeah, it's like, oh, quick, I've got to run to the bathroom and pull, like, a 47-page dossier on this very topic out of my ass.
Yeah, that might not even have been enough.
Yeah.
So, right. Yeah, a couple additional points I thought of here real quickly is that, like, also a lot of the politicians who are trying to rig the redistricting process are just totally open about what they're doing and just saying, no, we're trying to maximize the number of Republican districts that we're creating.
Yep.
And it's just like, and the Supreme Court even, like, said, like, no, we're never going to decide a redistricting case politically is unacceptable. And it's just like, oh, come on. Also, the example of Eric Cantor, who expressed some vague willingness to be open to some minor concessions on immigration reform, and then just getting absolutely steamrolled in a primary election and being defeated. For his
even Joe Crowley getting primaried by AOC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
would AOC have been able to win in more competitively drawn district, even in a more liberal state? I don't know.
But once she primaried Crowley, she was pretty much safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she does have a lot of skills as a politician. She is very eloquent and feels very down to earth, and a lot of people feel like they can, that she feels their struggle. So I wouldn't say that it was only because of the district, but I do think that the district played a big role.
But she also does represent the extreme left wing of the party, though.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so this one could be fun if you guys actually can think of answers for it. What is the best song released before 1950?
A song released before 1950. When was Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday released? If that fits, that'll be my pick.
Yeah, I think that probably was the 40s.
Yeah, 1939. Okay, yeah, I'll go Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday. Mostly because I think that's the only song released before 1950. That's on my 256 favorite songs bracket.
Yeah.
This is kind of a tough one, though. Like, I had to really, really think of, like, do I even listen to any songs that were released before 1950?
Yeah. Yeah, I know I have. I know obviously I listened to some. I'm just trying to think of one that would actually, like, be a compelling argument.
I'm going to guess something by Robert Johnson is what you'll end up going with.
Maybe. We'll see.
I think if I was going to go him, I maybe would have gone, like, Walkin' Blues. I think that's my favorite song by him. God, what would have been really interesting here would have been, like, best movie released before 1950, because I probably would have argued for Casablanca.
Yeah.
Or I could have gone for Casablanca or It Happened One Night.
Yeah.
I really like both of them. I probably would argue for Casablanca, though. I think that would have been easier to argue for. Because some of the humor in It Happened One Night just would not be socially acceptable now.
Yeah.
And, like, it would be way too easy to knock it on that.
Yeah, I think I'll go with Call It Stormy Monday by T-Bone Walker, but yeah, I'll take my bathroom break while we think.
Okay, I have never heard that song, so I might be doomed. Alright, Jason, so we've picked our songs. I have never heard Ben's song before, so we're each going to do one argument pitching you our song, and you're going to have to decide from that.
Okay, sounds good.
I can't counter a song I've never heard before.
Okay, I'm ready when you are. The best song released before 1950.
So the best song released before 1950 is Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday was a famous jazz singer who was really notable in the 30s and 40s, right?
Mm-hmm.
30s, 40s, 50s?
Yeah.
I don't know much about Billie Holiday, but the song Strange Fruit, it has this really eerie melody that just you kind of realize as soon as the song starts playing that I'm about to hear something that's really meaningful and is going to tell me, like, I just need to sit down and I need to listen. And when this song is over, I'm going to want to just sit and digest what I just heard. So it takes the song a little bit to get going. And when Billie Holiday starts singing, you don't realize right away what the song is about. And then as she keeps going, you realize that, oh, the strange fruit that she is talking about is black people that have been hung in the South and are swinging from trees. And just the idea of comparing lynching, which is what she's doing, is she's painting this really terrible in a conveying to the audience just how terrible of a practice lynching was. Like, she's conveying it in this song in a way that it pulls absolutely no punches. It describes exactly what's going on when she's like, they bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves, blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. I can't remember what the line after that is, but it's something poplar trees. And you just feel like it takes you to the place where you can see, you visualize exactly what she is singing about in a deeply, deeply unsettling way. And when that song came out in 1939, that was like before the civil rights movement and before World War II, or right before U.S. involvement in World War II, and that was a song that we needed to remember that, hey, this is from the not so distant past. Like, this happened to people, and this still happens to people, and this is terrible. And everybody needs to hear this song, because once you get that image in your head, that image never leaves your head. And it shouldn't, because the whole point is there's this terrible thing that we've been doing in this country, and that when the time comes, we're going to have to answer for this in one way or another, and we're never going to have a good answer for this. This is just some terrible thing that we let go on for a really long time, and yeah, it paints the picture in your head of the brutality and the unnecessariness of it in a way that is really, really powerful. And it has a really interesting melody that it catches your attention like right away, and then it just has you totally locked in for the entire 3.5 minutes of the song. And the first time I heard that song, I just paused and just stared at my ceiling for a few minutes. It was like, I haven't been this moved by a piece of music in a while, in like such a reflective way. And songs that will make you just stop and reflect on what you just heard like that are, in my opinion, the best pieces of music.
Okay, yeah, so my choice is Call It Stormy Monday by T-Bone Walker. Strange Fruit is definitely an excellent choice, and a great song. So I'm glad I don't have to argue against it, but I will pitch my song. So Call It Stormy Monday by T-Bone Walker is a blues song that was released in 1948. So this was kind of in the post-World War II period when things were, starting to return to normal, and it was kind of at the beginning of kind of a big boom in music as music became more urban and more electrified. And this was Zach's choice is very important in the context of social history. Mine is very important in the context of music history and the development of music history. Call It Stormy Monday by T-Bone Walker is kind of his biggest song. You may not be familiar with it, but you may have heard it because it's been covered a bunch of times. One of the most famous versions is by the Allman Brothers on the Fillmore East record, and it has the great opening lyrics of call it stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad, Wednesday's worse, and Thursday's also sad. So, it's typical blues lyrics of kind of singing about the struggles of, being a person working, trying to make a living and kind of scraping by and enjoying the good times when you can. But what really, sets it apart is just the incredible quality of the music. I mean, T-Bone Walker's one of the all-time great blues singers. He had this wonderful, smooth, suave voice. He had this really wonderful guitar style to match with similar qualities, and an excellent band. And also, he was very influential in this song in particular as his most successful song, really getting his sound out there. T-Bone Walker was one of the early adopters of electric guitar, and he was one of the early people to really play the electric guitar, realizing that it was a different instrument from the acoustic guitar. And he kind of got some of that from his association with another guitarist, Charlie Christian, who was a jazz guitarist, and T-Bone Walker kind of brought that same sensibility to the blues, because a lot of the early adopters in the blues just played the electric guitar like a louder version of an acoustic guitar. but T-Bone Walker realized that no, you don't just like strum chords and stuff. Like you can actually play these really nice single note solos and have them sound really different because you can adjust the tone with the amplifiers and things and create all these and create some really new sounds and use it in these unique ways. So, you know, people like B.B. King and John Lee Hooker, you know, and various other famous blues musicians that came in the ensuing years, like, were really influenced by this style. So, you know, what you have is it is a really beautiful, well-executed song, just an excellent example of great blues playing, but one that also kind of has this pivotal role in the adoption of the electric guitar as the instrument of the blues.
Okay, so Jason, what is your ruling after our pitches for our songs?
So I think that you both chose well. I didn't know if this was a category that was going to work because it's tough for people our age to know enough about the song released before 1950 to be able to speak knowledgeably about it. But I'm giving this one to Zach. I think his description of its role in the social world and the kind of the impact that it had in the context of its time as well as in the larger span of American history was very compelling. Ben, you did a good job kind of explaining why your song was musically important in the history of blues music. But the themes and the gravity of Zach's work, I think, really does speak to an issue that was important at the time and has echoes that remain very, very important today.
Yeah. Once Zach said Strange Fruit, I was like, oh, that is such a good choice. Like, I can't really, like, if he argues that at all well, which he probably will, like, I don't really have much of a chance against that, because, yeah, that is, like, an excellent performance, but also, like, yeah, just very important historically and to society in general. And, like, yeah, that, like, you know, you said it's like such a vivid portrayal of this issue that a lot of people were kind of turning a blind eye to. And, like, I heard a pretty interesting piece on NPR last year too about how, like, she got a lot of shit for singing that song, but she, you know, went from being like kind of ambivalent about singing it to, once she had sung it, being like, no, this is like a really powerful thing, and I'm not backing down, I'm owning this message.
All right. Okay, so Jason, what are our categories?
Okay, so Zach is choosing. None of the categories have been exhausted, and they remain U.S. politics, the internet, U.S. history, music and movies, and society.
We'll try U.S. history again. Let's see what else we got.
Okay. What is the worst Supreme Court decision in U.S. history?
I mean, Dred Scott v. U.S. Or no, Dred Scott v. Stanford.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is probably the... I mean, there's a few others.
There are some other contenders, but I think that's the obvious, just terrible one. Just like,
So
So Jason, what would you argue against Dred Scott with?
Yeah.
I would pick Korematsu v. U.S.
Yeah,
that would have been my second choice.
Yeah, that's also a really good one. So, yeah, I think I'll let you guys go, since you both, like, have more knowledge and stuff to say than I would.
Okay, yeah, because I'm gonna need the Wikipedia mind to remember the exact particulars of what I'm gonna say here.
Yeah, because I think, like, yeah, the three that came to mind were Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, I think, is like the other one that's really bad with, and then Korematsu, like that is a really horrible one.
Yeah, and then there was an Indian removal case where Cherokees had challenged their removal that made it way up to the Supreme Court.
Oh.
And that would be really good, but I would need to research that one just a little bit in order to feel comfortable arguing it.
Right, yeah.
All right, Jason, go ahead.
Okay, so Korematsu versus the United States is the worst Supreme Court decision in U.S. history because it shows that the fundamental protections of what we think of as our core civil rights don't exist in practice during a time of national emergency. The internment of the Japanese Americans during World War II was entirely unnecessary, although it seemed very plausible to the public at the time that it was. It was essentially, we talk today of racial profiling. The internment of the Japanese makes that argument seem a bit academic and quaint by comparison. It was mass suspicion of Americans based upon their race and taking away their basic freedoms. It was telling them where they had to live, and they could not live freely among society. And the conditions were cramped. And it was so bad that I think it was ultimately Reagan that paid reparations to the Japanese Americans that had lived through that horrible abuse of their basic rights. The reason why it's worst, even worse than the Dred Scott decision, is because it's more recent. World War II was within our grandparents' lifetimes. This was not something that was decided in a time in American history that was drastically different than the present. Yes, we're a different society than we were in World War II, but that was a stone's throw away. We remain in a world that it has to deal with difficult questions regarding national security. And the Supreme Court essentially decided that in a time of national emergency, basic civil rights protections don't apply. While the horrors of slavery were great, slavery ended. So, and the Dred Scott decision has been overturned. Certainly the Korematsu decision was possibly overturned by an aside in the Muslim ban decision by Supreme Court Justice John Roberts. Whether that was dicta or whether that was an actual binding side note is actually of some debate. But when push came to shove and it was actually a question of, does the president have this massive power to strip Americans of their basic civil rights during wartime, the Supreme Court said yes. And the Muslim ban case was similarly decided based upon just entirely frivolous, baseless arguments. And the Supreme Court there once again said, well, this is the president's decision to make, given his authorities over immigration, and it's not for us to second guess. And the policy was wrong, but the Supreme Court letting it happen was in some ways an even worse stain upon our nation's dignity and character, and one that is a tendency that unfortunately continues to this day.
Okay, so I think the reason, yes, Korematsu v. U.S. was absolutely terrible, and it is so recent that it makes it feel even worse. But with the Dred Scott decision, in 1857, we had Roger Taney thought that it would be a good idea. So the facts of the Dred Scott case, where he was a slave who his owners had taken him into free territory, so he tried to argue in court that because he was taken into free territory, that meant he had automatically been freed, which, makes sense. It's kind of maybe a weak case, but he fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. Instead of just saying, no, the fact that you were taken into free territory doesn't automatically make you a free citizen, instead of just saying that, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court thought that he needed to make the point in his majority opinion to say that black people are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which the instrument provides for and secures to citizens of the United States. So Roger Taney, at a time when the slavery issue was the biggest issue driving American politics and was about to lead to the division of the country in 4 years of bloody civil war, where 600,000 American lives died, or 600,000 Americans died for a large reason over slavery. Instead of doing anything to try to solve that issue, he inflamed it in a way that it hadn't been in a very long time, because he went out of his way to say that no, not only is Dred Scott still a slave, no black people are citizens. And that was just an unnecessary step that hastened the beginning of the Civil War. And when you read the Cornerstone speech by Alexander Stephens, when he says, our government is founded upon its cornerstone rests on the idea that the Negro is not equal to the white man, Roger Taney said that in a Supreme Court decision over a case when he didn't need to say that, but he went out of his way to make that point to show that no, not only am I striking down Dred Scott's admittedly flimsy case, I am saying definitively for the record, black people aren't citizens. And we had to have multiple constitutional amendments to overturn this decision. So I think because of that, and because it is regarded by scholars and historians as uniformly the worst Supreme Court decision ever, I think it is slightly worse than Korematsu v. U.S., but Korematsu v. U.S. hits a lot of the same points. But I will not have to Wikipedia the exact particulars of Korematsu v. U.S. again to be able to argue against it, because I was touching up on my Wikipedia on Dred Scott while Jason was arguing. So, yes, I was listening, but not closely enough.
So, yeah, I've been researching Dred Scott during your argument as well, so you are in good company. So, let's see. Where to begin? The reason why Dred Scott was not as harmful as Korematsu was because, precisely because the country was so divided, it didn't resonate as widely, or at least Taney's opinion as Supreme Court Justice, speaking nominally, at least on behalf of the majority of the court. Most people already had their mind made up about slavery. This decision didn't change minds. It was a horrible decision, clearly one of the worst in U.S. history. But the country did fight a civil war and amended the Constitution and decided, no, you're wrong. Or we're going to make it so that your decision doesn't matter anymore, at least as a matter of the law that is in place today. And thank God. But, yeah, Dred Scott was a horrible decision, and obviously was a way of showing deference to the horrible institution that had divided the country and was immortal. But Korematsu happened, it was a thoroughly modern opinion. It was, and moreover, it was a decision that the vast majority of the country thought was necessary. It was not the lightning rod that Dred Scott was in the divided country. It was the dominant opinion of executive power given a seemingly existential threat during the World War. Korematsu was worse because it was so much in step with dominant opinion at the time. Opinion that was wrong. The Supreme Court really does need to be a check when the population decides that it wants to restrict the rights of a minority unnecessarily. And that did not happen in the Korematsu decision. And the Dred Scott case was a very difficult one, I think, for the justices involved. It was a rough time for the court as it was for the country. Obviously, it was much rougher on Dred Scott than it was on here or the justices of the court. But the Dred Scott case was the national debate that had reached a fever pitch, reaching the Supreme Court, whereas Korematsu was the court giving a rubber stamp to a government that was acting upon the opinion of the population that was committed to giving the president all of the powers that he thought was necessary, even when they weren't. I think, obviously, these are one and two of the worst in U.S. history. I just think Korematsu edges out Dred Scott ever so slightly.
I think the reason Dred Scott edges out Korematsu ever so slightly is just because Taney went out of his way to have his majority opinion be above and beyond what the facts of the case were, and he tried to have the final word on the slavery issue and the race issue in the country, and his ham-fisted handling of that opinion just gashed open the wound in a way that made it impossible to bandage again. Whereas the Korematsu decision, I hate that I'm having to use this line of argument, but a lot of really dubious decisions are made during wartime because people are terrified. And I think that the internment of the Japanese, because Japanese internment wasn't directed only at Japanese, it was directed at aliens from any of the Axis powers, and it was just the majority of them were Japanese. So I think that it is totally a function of its time and a function of wartime paranoia and a function of a fear of the enemy. And I understand why they thought Japanese internment was a military necessity, whereas the Dred Scott decision, Roger Taney did not have to decide that he, Roger Taney, was going to have the last word on race in America and just be so ham-fisted about it that it I'm not saying that the Civil War would have been avoided if he wouldn't have said that, because slavery was such a big problem. It's just we had tried over the years to bandage it and just keep it going, and maybe we could stumble our way through and see what would happen. And the beginning of the Civil War wasn't necessarily a war the focus of getting rid of slavery was not a main Northern war aim at the beginning of the war, because they thought that, like, Lincoln and the members of his cabinet thought that, okay, the South will fight to the bitter end if we're fighting to give up slavery. And a lot of the northern populace doesn't necessarily want to give up slavery because they don't want a bloody, protracted war. But stuff like the Dred Scott decision so inflamed public opinion that eventually it's, okay, we have to deal with this because we can't just keep this as a festering wound. And Roger Taney made it a festering wound.
It was a festering wound before. Okay, it was a festering wound before it reached the Supreme Court. Roger Taney, in particular, did not handle it well. Obviously, that's what we're debating. The decision that the court reached. It's hard for me to imagine that the outcome of this case would have had a huge impact on the public debate and public opinion in the time leading up to and during the Civil War. Obviously, it didn't help, but I think it would have reached a fever pitch regardless, but one that the Supreme Court could have played less of a role in upsetting. Just to reiterate my earlier points, Korematsu decision was bad because, well, obviously it was the worst because it was unnecessary and it was not a check at a time when we needed a check on the government. And that same logic is very much alive and well in the Supreme Court today.
Okay, Ben, what is your ruling?
Yeah, that was, obviously really close because, both these decisions were terrible and kind of terrifying in the fact that they not only perpetuated discrimination, but actually, were part of further taking away people's rights. This is tough. I'm gonna go with Zach here because I think they both have a lot of the same bad stuff going for them. I think Zach's points about Tani kind of going out of his way to make the decision worse than it had to be, and the fact that it inflamed tensions at such a time as we were really close to the Civil War, that's maybe a little more that was maybe just a little more convincing as far as the damage that it did that you could trace back to the case. Although I do agree, Jason, that there are also some pretty damaging things like your example with the Muslim ban reasoning that you can kind of trace back to Korematsu, but it's I think the direct consequences of Dred Scott, it seemed like it was a little more of a immediate thing. But yeah, God, they're both terrible and both have a lot in common in their terribleness.
Yeah, you have to choose Dred Scott because had the Civil War not turned out the way that it did, or had the Civil War not happened, Dred Scott would have been controlling law, or at least it would have held a hell of a lot more sway had the 13th Amendment ever happened.
Yeah.
And in many ways, that possibility was just as real as the possibility that we got. So, just the substance of the opinion itself was bad, but it was so bad we fixed it within a reasonable amount of time. But
But yes, Jason, if I was arguing against Dred Scott, I would have made all of those same arguments. Those are just the arguments to make against that. But it's just too. At least Korematsu is so bad, Dred Scott isn't the unimpeachable right answer, but it's pretty close to being the unimpeachable right answer.
Yeah, I might have been able to argue the Indian removal case if I had all of the facts that I needed at the ready. I just knew the most about Korematsu to be able to argue it. quickly.
Wait, argue what?
Well, the Cherokees
Okay.
contested their removal and the Indian Removal Act.
I think that's Winchester v. Georgia. I think that was Winchester v. Georgia, maybe.
I could make a passionate argument for that, but I'd have to do some research first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I probably could have made it. Like Dred Scott, like, even though that's probably the best choice, I just don't think I knew enough of the details to argue for that. I probably could have made a decent argument for either Korematsu or Plessy versus Ferguson, but those are like the only two that would like qualify that I really know enough about to like not sound like a total idiot.
Okay, so society. What is the worst piece of advice society gives young adults?
Follow your passion. Actually, no. The worst piece of advice society gives young adults is that you have to go to college.
So, Ben, if you can't think of a good one, I could argue this one, but I'm probably best positioned to argue the politics prompts that remain.
Okay.
Okay, so my position would be, or the one I want to argue for is that everything happens for a reason.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really have a good one, so yeah, go ahead. This will be an interesting one.
Okay, so the reason why the worst piece of advice that the world gives young adults is that you have to go to college, is that you need to go to college. Because there are a lot of fulfilling careers that you could do that you don't necessarily need to go get a 4-year college degree for. And the reason our generation is going to be borderline indentured wage slaves is because we were told our entire lives, hey, go to college. One of the only things you take out a loan for is your college education. Go get your college education. And then a lot of us didn't necessarily make the best decision with the degree that we got, and we find ourselves in a world where we don't fit anywhere in the job market, and we went and we got our college education, and now we have mountains of student loan debt that we're never going to pay off, and that is because we just followed the advice of our parents and of that generation and the generation before of, hey, go to college, get your college education. Like, if you don't know what you want to do yet, don't go to college yet. Like, if you change majors 3 or 4 times and you end up in college for 6 or 7 years and you rack up tons of student loan debt, like, you would have been better off taking a couple of gap years, figuring out what you wanted to do, and then once you knew what you wanted to do and you had a clear idea of why you wanted to go to college then. That's why if I proposed the hypothetical yesterday of, if you're appointed dictator for life in the U.S., what are the 5 policies you would implement, your 5 major policies? And part of my major education reform policy is I would make a gap year mandatory, because I don't think at 18 you are not ready to make decisions that affect the rest of your life. And at 18, you're not ready to immediately go to college knowing what you want to do and knowing that, oh, hey, I'm going to go get this degree that's going to be the career that I'm going to have for the rest of my life. I didn't figure out that I wanted the career that I wanted until I was 26. And that was after I had gone to college and I had already racked up tons of student loan debt for a degree I'm never going to use. And for a degree I didn't actually finish because I was never committed to finishing. I feel like I probably would have been better off not better off because but I would have been financially better off for my future if I had not gone to college immediately to follow my passion and get my degree in history that I'm just not going to use. And the only way I was ever going to use is if I ended up getting my master's in history and get my PhD in history and become a college professor. And then I have $100,000 or more worth of student loan debt to be a college professor and not make that much money and have my student loan debt be the driving force of my entire life. So the worst advice you can give an 18-year-old is that you have to go to college. And not only that you have to go to college, that you have to go to college right away. No. Take time, Figure out what you want. Ask yourself where you want to be in 10 years. And if you have to go to college to get there, then by all means do it. But don't just do it because that's what everybody does. Because if you find yourself at 27 with $100,000 in student loan debt, you're going to look back and say, how the fuck did I get here? So, yeah, my advice to you, don't go to college until you know exactly what you're going for. So the worst piece of advice you can get is to just blindly go and follow your passion, which would have been my second pick. Is follow your passion is bullshit. But go ahead, Jason. I'm done. I'm done with my.
Okay. So I don't know if this is necessarily advice. It's more of a life philosophy, but I will explain how this idea kind of takes many forms. But the idea, which is very common, or at least, yes, very common. Certainly I've heard it many times. A lot of people have a life philosophy that everything happens for a reason. And what they mean by that is not a basic belief in causation. What they mean by that is that everything that happens because it's the best thing that could happen. That either it's all part of God's plan, or God works in mysterious ways, or that, just that all events ultimately work out for the best in the end, which is complete madness, because there are people who are raped, and, that's not good. There are people who die in car crashes that they did not cause. Not saying that it's good that people die in car crashes that they do cause, but you have people who are orphaned because their father dies off in Afghanistan fighting in a war, or off in Iraq, or you have people who are sexually abused as children, or you have all sorts of horrible things that happen to people. You have kids who see their classmates shot in high school because there's a mass shooting at their school. And these are obviously things that everyone knows because, or at least, people who watch the news and don't live under a rock are aware that there is evil in the world. But the fact that there are so many people in the world who believe that, no, everything that happens because it's the best thing that could happen, that all of these seemingly horrible things are actually, in the end, serving the greater good. No, that is absurd. And going through life pretending as if all of the bad stuff really needed to happen all along prevents people from actually taking the initiative, in some cases, to try to change things. This type of attitude is expressed in other ways as well. The everything happens for a reason is, I think, the most emblematic of this attitude. But there is an idea of, Jesus take the wheel, go with the flow. All of these ideas that say you feel stressed out, you see things that are going horribly wrong, just don't worry about it. Don't try to fix it. Just skate along, try to get by. And the real challenge of the world is that there's so much wrong with it, and so little that any average person can do to actually fix those problems, and that you do need to choose your battles, and that sometimes it's not worth fighting every injustice. But to pretend that it's not worth fighting any of them, or to pretend as if they don't exist, or that they're all part of the greater good, is a really bad message to send to people. And I mean, like, the people who do believe that everything happens for a reason are genuinely good people, but they don't tend to be the people who actually fully recognize the injustices of the world or take the most initiative to try to fix them. And not everyone needs to be Martin Luther King or Harriet Tubman, but it would sure be great if more people recognized the need for those types of figures, even if they don't want to be them personally. As for Zach's arguments that the worst advice is telling everyone that they need to go to college right away, that's tough, because he's right in that not everyone needs to go to college, and there's lots of degrees that there are lots of jobs that you can get without a college degree or by going to an associate's degree or some sort of technical training that are great, wonderful, important jobs. But there are a lot of people like Zach and I really don't have a clear vision of what they wanted to do with their life. I mean, I certainly had tons of different things that I was interested in as a high school graduate. And it's kind of hard to pin that down when you're not in an environment where you can explore those things like college. Like, if I had a gap year, I think that would be great, because I would have done something with AmeriCorps or some sort of public service work that would have been very fulfilling. That might not have been part of my career that I could have gotten the chance to do. But I don't know if it would have really helped me narrow down my search. Really what narrowed down my search, or maybe not narrowed it down, you really need practice in the career that you're going to be in. Internships and things like that. If you know, job shadowing. If there's an industry that you're thinking about majoring in, maybe require them to take 6 months job shadowing somebody who does the job. Just saying, don't go to college if you don't know what you want. Like, that's tough, because there's a lot of people who don't know what they want, who are very skilled, who wouldn't be able to know what they want if they didn't have somewhere to explore those ideas. Not necessarily saying college is the best way to do it, but just having a gap year really doesn't solve that problem. I think it's good for other reasons. I really do think that we ought not send everybody to college. Everyone's not cut out for college. And obviously we need to make it so much less expensive. If it was just publicly funded and you didn't have to pay massive amounts to go there, it would be less of a problem not knowing exactly what you want to do. Although, yeah, it's just hard for me to see that as the biggest flaw. It is a flaw in a system of many flaws pertaining to how we transition people from high school to career.
Okay, so you say that the advice or the mindset that everything happens for a reason is bad advice when you're looking at things on, like, a societal scale, but everything happens for a reason can be a positive way for people to reflect on how, or can be a positive way for you to do self-reflection. Like, okay, I ended up doing this job and I did this thing because when I had this chance to make this decision that I wasn't sure of, I made the decision. I made that decision that I did, which led me to here. So that can actually be a good framework for people to be able to self-reflect and understand decisions that they made. Whereas I agree that on, like, a societal scale, saying that, you know, everything happens for a reason because somebody died in a car crash, like, okay, that's tough. But I think that can be, if that is your personal framework with which you digest the certain periods of your life, or like say, I needed to do this so that I could do this. I don't think that that is as negative of a piece of advice as you're saying. I'm saying that it is negative if you're just I think go with the flow is a lot more of a negative piece of advice than everything happens for a reason, because go with the flow just says that, okay, no matter what happens, just, this is just going to happen. Whereas everything happens for a reason. You at least have some control over the reason, and you can reflect on what the reason was. So, like, for example, the reason I went back I joined another master's program to become an elementary school teacher is because I started working in elementary schools. And the reason that I started working in elementary schools is because I took a long-term sub gig at the beginning of the year, because I didn't realize that if I didn't take that long-term sub gig, I'd get called a ton of times every morning. And a lot of very tenuous, unlikely things led me to where I am now. So, like, yes, your thing that you think, it can be a useful framework with which to understand your life. Whereas, if you don't know what you want to do, especially with as expensive as college is, like, yes, college is a great place to discover yourself and to kind of figure out what you want to do with your life, but I think you are better suited to take advantage of that opportunity if you take some time and you get some perspective and you have some real-world experience. Because I think the biggest problem that people run into as new college freshmen, and why a lot of people kind of don't take it seriously and spend way too much time drinking and flunk out, is because they don't have the perspective and the understanding of the consequences and the knowledge that they need to take this seriously. So you have people that will go and they'll flunk out one time, then they'll go away, they'll get some perspective, then they'll go back in a couple years and say, yeah, I didn't take it seriously the first time I was here, but now that I had the experience of flunking out, I can come back and realize that, okay, no, I really need to take this seriously. And I think if you had a gap year, and you had like a gap year where you got some real world experience outside of like, okay, I don't have the safety net of high school or home or anything, and I'm getting, because I think college feels a little bit too much like, okay, this is the first time, especially when you're really young and you go to college, like your first year or so, you get just that idea of like, okay, I'm away from home and I don't have to be accountable to anyone other than myself, and you just go crazy. Whereas I think with a gap year there, where you have to have some accountability to whatever job you're doing, that will make you better suited to being accountable for your education that some people aren't necessarily ready for when they go when they're 18 and they don't necessarily know what they want to do, and they're just in college. They're just in college because that's what you do when you graduate from high school, is you go to college. And I think if you made it less of a just thing that everybody did, like, oh, hey, you have to go to college, then those people that don't necessarily need to go to college or want to go to college, and who just kind of are because it's what all of their friends did, they can say like, well, yeah, I realized after a year that, hey, I really don't need to go to college and I don't want to go into student loan debt. I have this successful, fulfilling career as like a mechanic or a plumber or whatever, because there are some people that just want to do that because that's what they're good at, and the world needs people who do those kinds of things. And if after your gap year you realize that, hey, I know what I want to do and I don't need to go to college for it, that's great. Or you understand like, hey, I know what I want to do and I need to go get this college degree. Or you're in a situation like Ben was in, where he knew that, hey, I want to go study geography in college, even if I know I'm not going to use my college degree. I want to go have the experience of college, and because I'm an only child with fairly well-off parents, I'm not going to have to take out any student loans. So, if you're in that situation, then take advantage of it. But I'm saying a lot of people aren't in that situation, and they find themselves where we are now, where, oh God, I have a ton of student loans, and that is going to be the thing that defines the rest of my life. And the reason so many politicians now, especially the progressive ones, are saying like, hey, let's just cancel student loan debt, is because millennials aren't buying homes and they aren't starting families because we can't. Our student loan payments are gonna like be this financial anchor around our necks for our entire lives. And the reason our student loans got so out of hand is because it was preached to us our entire lives growing up. You go to college. That's just what you do. You go get your college degree. You get a college degree. Sorry if that got kind of rambly.
No, that's fine. So, I mean, Zach has made some very passionate arguments. I don't think the arguments necessarily lead to his conclusion. Student debt is ruinous for a society and for young adults. But that debt would be ruinous regardless of whether you took a gap year or if you went to college right away. Giving people the advice of you don't have to go to college would mean that some people wouldn't, and you might be better off not going. But I think a critical mass of people are going to want to go to college for the experience, are going to want to go because they're going to go into a career that requires them to have a college degree, or because they're the kind of person that thinks that they would enjoy going to college. And whether they go under what conditions, as long as it still costs them an arm, a leg, and the next 20 years or 50 years of their life to pay off that debt, that's going to be a problem regardless of whether and when they decide to go to college, under what circumstances, after having thought about what they want to do for however long. The reason why everything happens for a reason, I think, is worse advice. And again, like the other forms of this types of advice, which I've laid out, go with the flow, Jesus take the wheel, those types of attitudes, is that if there is something incredibly traumatic in your life, like being raped, rape victims very often blame themselves for what happened. They say, what could I have done differently? They run it over and over in their head. They have panic attacks and traumatic episodes and PTSD and things like that. I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them. Other people who have traumatic events that happen in their life can go through similar experiences. If you have PTSD from being over in Afghanistan, or if you've been beat by your husband, things like that. And not everyone is going to have that kind of scarring, gigantic traumatic event in their life. But for those who do, telling them that, everything happens for a reason, like everything happens for the greater good in the end, is really horrible advice. I mean, I'm all for self-reflection, and I do think that there are benefits of bad things. There are silver linings. There are lessons we learn from experiences we would have rather not had. But there are better ways of expressing those very helpful, very constructive ideas than pretending as if everything in the world is fine and wonderful when it isn't.
Okay, I have nothing else to say.
All right. So that was an interesting argument, because we had two very different things, and one some pretty interesting philosophical and life advice arguments there. I'm gonna go with Zach here, because I think those are both like, I think you both demonstrated how those are like.
I did not think I was going to win that. I'll take that.
Yeah, like I think you both demonstrated how those things can be really damaging, but like the fact that like Zach was like, I think, Zach, like your solutions that you proposed, like if the argument was about, if that's what the prompt was about, like that might not have worked so well, but the argument was about just the bad advice itself, and wow, that was and you were able to
that was a drawer opener.
happening.
That's fine. And so you were able to, give some concrete examples of just like how much making a bad decision based on that advice can negatively impact your life. And Jason, I think you did a good job showing like how that can also like that the advice you chose can negatively impact your life, but it's not it's harder to like really say how much that advice specifically contributes because it is a little more nebulous. And also like since the prompt was originally specifically for young people, I think like Zach was able to really hone in on how that negative advice specifically hurts young people. So like, yeah, I think those are both like really interesting and well argued, but I'm going with Zach on this one.
Yeah, I came up with the prompt and then my answer is kind of separately, and I'm like, this is what I want to argue, but this is the better prompt.
Right.
So I kind of realized the dissonance there. For me, most of the fun in this is getting to argue passionately for a position that you care about.
Yeah.
I don't really care as much about the winning or losing. I do think I had pretty good counters for Zach's arguments. I do think Zach's argument was much better tailored to the prompts.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we both had some good arguments, and Zach made a lot of really good points. I still don't think some of his arguments fit perfectly into what his answer, but nonetheless, that was a really fun one to argue.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I don't think like the gap year stuff like was totally convincing, but like that wasn't like something that I needed to be convinced on. It was more just like the student loan debt and how like making a bad decision can impact your future so much. Like that was the more important part to me. But yeah, that was definitely an interesting juxtaposition.
Okay, Zach, the prompts I want to argue next, or before we end today, or the politics ones, I think all of the other ones can play fairly well. So.
Okay, so what are the politics ones? Because I can probably stumble my way through one of those.
Okay, so, and I think you'll want to argue this one. What will be the most defining aspect of the legacy of the Trump presidency?
The most defining aspect of the legacy of the Trump presidency. Okay, the general fear of not knowing what's coming next.
Oh,
and just
yeah, that was
and
one
just
of
like
the two that I was going to choose, but yeah.
And just like the general fear of like, okay, anything is on the table, and I'm terrified of what this man is capable of.
Yep.
I guess just the Trump's unpredictability, the unpredictability of the future.
Okay, so the prompt is, what will be the most defining aspect of the legacy of the Trump presidency? My answer is going to be Trump's racism and bigotry.
And my answer is the unpredictability and fear of whatever Trump is going to do next.
Okay. So the reason why Trump's racism and bigotry will be the most defining aspect of his legacy is because it is so unabashedly, unapologetically, crystal clear. He began his campaign by descending an escalator and giving an announcement to pretend supporters who were paid by the campaign to be there. He literally paid actors in the beginning. And Trump...
That is amazing. I didn't know that.
Yep. And Trump said that Mexico was not sending its finest. It was, Mexico is sending rapists and thugs. And that began the Trump campaign. Before then, Trump became known in the political arena because of his unabashed promotion and relentless promotion of the birther conspiracy theory against Barack Obama, that he really wasn't born in the United States, but he was really born in Kenya because he's black. He's not a real president because real Americans aren't black. They're not legitimate Americans. Obama had already released his short form birth certificate long before any of that had happened. That made things crystal clear. And Trump whipped up the country into a frenzy until it was 50-50, like, oh, who knows? I guess we don't know if Barack Obama is born in the U.S. Trump, as president, gave a speech at CPAC where he said that where he compared immigrants to this story of a woman taking a snake into her home and having that snake turn against her. He gave an incredibly racist Oval Office address where he was talking about the angel moms, which were the moms of children who were killed by illegal immigrants. He constantly fearmongers about the Latino gang M16, and he paints illegal immigrants as if they're just all gang members and rapists and threats to you and your family and your daughter and your wife and your kids. When in fact, illegal immigrants commit lower rates of crime than native-born Americans. His bigotry is not hidden. It's not filtered. It's not in any way under the surface. It is there, and it is relentless, and it is undeniable. And when people are writing history books about the Trump era, they will use those quotes. They will use his words, which there are no double meanings. There are no alternative explanations for what he's doing. He brought about the Muslim ban because he was fear-mongering about the threats of Islamic terrorism when from the countries he banned, there wasn't any terrorist attacks in the U.S. in the past 40 years. No serious national security experts from either party, from any previous administration, thought that it was a good idea. In fact, many of those experts signed an amicus brief saying that it was a bad idea, and urged the Supreme Court to knock it down. One of his sons was talking about, if just 1 in 100 Skittles was poison and would kill you, would you still eat them? And using that as a metaphor for Muslim immigrants. It's just, the dehumanization is just so bad. And his bigotry influences his decisions on immigration, on who can serve in the military, and discriminating against transgender folks. It diffuses his entire being. And when historians are going to be trying to encapsulate this period of time, those quotes are an essential part of the fabric of Trump's time in American history following the first African-American president, and how he belittled and did not accept him as legitimate because of Obama's race, and the anti-immigration sentiment that riled up the Republican base that got Trump elected, whether it's Trump's role in history, whether it's what won him the White House, what he did when he was there, it's all defined by bigotry. And that is the crystal clear, easiest part of his legacy that will stand out above and beyond all the rest.
I really hate that I'm gonna have to open my argument by saying this, and it's nothing new. We've had racist, bigot presidents throughout the entirety of American history who have relied on similar rhetoric to what Trump uses, and who have built their bases on the worst aspects of our American society. Look at any Democratic president before the Civil War, or like Andrew Jackson, who rallied like the worst forces in society and used just demagoguery to get where they wanted, and had really horrible racist policies like Indian removal. So yes, what Trump is doing is really, really shocking, and his bigotry is really shocking because it's 2020 and we thought we were already past that, but it's proven that we aren't. What I think the bigger legacy of the Trump presidency is going to be is just how unpredictable Trump is, and how much fear there is that the majority of the country, because he was elected by a minority of people in the presidential election, the majority of the people have no idea what's coming next, and they are absolutely terrified by what's coming next, because Donald Trump will make decisions on the toilet at like 2 a.m. based on what he's reading on Twitter, or he'll just fire off these random tweets that have these policy decisions, and his entire administration feels like it's just flying by the seat of their pants all of the time, and it doesn't feel like we have competent leadership and like we can trust our president. And I think the fact that the majority of the country cannot trust him and is afraid of the decisions that he is going to make because they know that he will deliberately not listen to facts or logic or science or his advisors, and he just is a demagogue who makes off-the-cuff decisions that are usually terrible, it will be the biggest defining aspect of his presidency. The bigotry and the racism, as terrible as it is, it's sadly nothing new in American history. And like, it seems so shocking because of the progress that has been made with the civil rights movement and with the election of Barack Obama, but I think Trump and the kind of just horribleness that he has dredged out of the woodwork is a reaction we did in 16 years or 12 years. We did the most progressive thing we've done in presidential politics and the most regressive thing we've done in presidential politics. And Trump is a reaction to the racist and bigot and worst impulses of America fighting back against a system that they were angry at. But it's nothing new. We've seen that with tons of presidents in the past, and yes, it's terrible, but it is more of the rule than the exception.
So the reason why the fear and uncertainty of the Trump presidency will not be its defining legacy is because much of Trump's legacy will be determined by people who weren't alive during it, or who were too young to remember much about it. And that a lot of the president's legacy is about people explaining presidency to people who were not there at the time. And it's going to be really hard to explain the fear of the uncertainty and the instability of the president, because when you're telling history, you already know the end. You know where things are going. You know Lincoln's going to get shot. You know the North is going to win the war. So the drama is taken out of it. The suspense is taken out of it. The fear is taken out of it. I hope that we can convey somehow just the dread and the uncertainty of not knowing what Trump is going to do next. But generally speaking, most tellings of history are not good at that. And I don't see any reason why it would get better in the tellings of the Trump presidency. It really does take someone who's very adept at explaining politics to explain that uncertainty, that fear, that oh my God, what's he gonna do next? The three of us have figured out how to do it. I think that's well beyond the skills of most citizens to be able to effectively do, particularly to those who were not alive at the time. So I think that the bigotry will be clear not only to those who lived through it, but to those who are explaining it to those who were not there. And that is a concept that is much more easily conveyed in the ways in which we are used to telling history. So that's why I think that the bigotry will be the most defining aspect of Trump's legacy, rather than the uncertainty.
I'm not done. I'm just thinking of the right thing to say. The people that are going to be telling the history of the Trump presidency are the people who lived through it. It's probably going to be our generation, because this is making up. This is the beginning of our early adult lives, and we were trying to find our footing in a scary world. And what made that even more terrifying for a lot of us is that we had a president who we didn't feel was legitimate, who we knew didn't have our best interests in mind, and who we knew could make decisions that wildly affected our lives just off the cuff all of the time, and that it felt like there was no rhyme or reason to what he was doing, and we were always in fear of, like, okay, what's Trump going to do next, and how might it affect me? And just that general sense of fear and anxiety is something that, like you said, with the bigotry, all you have to do to convey that sense of fear and anxiety is write in your book, like, yeah, this was decided over Twitter without any like counsel with his advisors, like the transgender military ban. That came out in a tweet. And it's like, it got to the point where it didn't feel like we had a professional guiding voice who could comfort the people. We have someone who is only concerned with with how each decision will affect them politically, and politics is just entirely a game to them, and they do not care about how their decisions affect other people. And therefore, because they don't care about how their decisions affect the majority of people, they only care about how their decisions are going to be received politically in a way that is really, really dangerous, and we haven't seen that many times from a lot of other presidents. It is terrifying. Completely terrifying. And I think the people that are going to be telling the history of the Trump presidency, yes, they will talk about his bigotry and his racism and about how that was a force that led to a lot of his decisions. But the more defining force that led, the more defining scary thing of his presidency was just that everything was so unpredictable. And it wasn't like you could see these things. Usually with major pieces of legislation, it takes a couple months for it to get off the ground. But with the Trump presidency, there have been things that have just been decided. You're like, wait, what? That wasn't even on the radar, and all of a sudden it's decided. And just the fact that you knew that there was somebody in office that was so unstable and so ill-prepared and weak-minded that just made decisions without thinking about the ramifications for regular people, and that person was in charge for 4 years or 8 years. He might win the election, because I guess according to polls, people are happy with how he's responding to coronavirus. I don't know how that's possible, but whatever.
Yeah, I could go on a rant on that for a long time.
Just the fear and uncertainty that has governed our lives for the last 4 years is unique in a way that I don't remember it in my lifetime. And if I am telling the history of the Trump presidency, his bigotry and racism does not stand out to me in a way that the fear and uncertainty of everyday life does.
Because, like I said, and I'm not discounting bigotry and racism because it's terrible, and I think the worst singular thing he has done as a president was that speech in response to Charlottesville. But this is nothing new in American history, and it is really, really bad. I'm not discounting that it's bad, but it stands out to us because of the time that it is happening, but it's not something we haven't seen from other presidents in the past. Whereas we haven't had a president who just so unpredictably decides things and is as much of a demagogue.
So the difference between history and current events is that when we read history, we know how it ends, or at least where it's going. History doesn't really ever have an end, but certainly when you live through a decision by tweet on something really important, it's terrifying. When you're reading about a decision via tweet, and you say this was a decision made without consulting his advisors, and he set it out over Twitter, and you know that the transgender military ban was reversed by the next president, and it's no longer policy, then it's kind of humorous in a dark way.
No, it isn't.
Deeply unsettling, terrifying thing. I'm speaking for not necessarily myself, but I imagine for some readers. So I think that the unsettling nature of the Trump presidency is obviously what stands out in my mind as the biggest part of what his presidency was like. But I don't think that that's the thing that will stand out in the history books, in the retellings, in people's mind as they reflect back on the time if they weren't there or if they're writing a book about it. And moreover, I hope and believe that we are becoming a more tolerant, less racist country. And for readers who live in a much less racist country, read about just how horribly racist Trump was, that will stick out like a sore thumb. And yes, it is well in line with American history, but hopefully it's not in line with where we're going.
I don't have anything else.
All right. Yeah, that was a really interesting debate. I think, yeah, like I agree that, like, in my mind also, like, the unpredictability and fear and uncertainty that comes from that is probably the most defining thing. But Jason won me over here with the combination of, like, being able to pull some really specific examples, and then that really thoughtful discussion of, like, what kinds of things are easier to record and how history is remembered, and being able to, like, pull those specific examples and say, like, these quotes will appear in textbooks or whatever. So, like, yeah, I think, like, yeah, it is harder to convey the uncertainty. Like, I think what could do that would be if there is something, like, for example, if it's judged that, like, the coronavirus, the way that was handled was, like, a complete shit show, and then, you can look at Trump's wild vacillations and unclear messaging and be like, okay, look how we can, like, this is an example where we can really see how this contributed to this really turning into a really bad situation. And I can see, like, it'd be the kind of thing where, like, yeah, you could have different kinds of ways that this is recorded, because, like, yeah, the the racism and bigotry is, I think, easier to look at like in an academic context, but like the just unpredictability does make for, and you know, like Jason said, it could be kind of darkly humorous, but it does make for like kind of a good story just to like kind of encapsulate what kind of person Trump is, you know, for like, I could imagine like a history teacher just being like, hey kids, you know, there was this president that made this decision via a tweet. Can you believe that? What a dope, you know, it's kind of it is kind of an interesting like thing, but yeah, I think Jason like it's just argued those points really well, so it won me over.
I thought I might have been in trouble when I had to argue how it's not shocking because other people have done it for, you know, being a racist bastard. It's like, yeah, that's probably not going to work, but that's the only path forward I have here.
I mean, that was not a bad argument. It's just I think I had enough other good ones to overwhelm it.
Yeah, it's yeah, it didn't hurt, but like, yeah, it yeah, you're right. It was more Jason had more good arguments to overwhelm it.
So, on kind of a sad side note, Ben, do you remember the dude who was in like the Indian bread video for Basics with Babish?
Oh yeah, I saw that.
That guy caught coronavirus and died.
Yeah, that's really sad.
Oh,
Yeah, he just seemed like the nicest guy too. Like even though I only saw that one video, like man.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's this political ad that has come out that the Trump campaign like gave a cease and desist order on, where they have the number of coronavirus cases going, like show how it's going as Trump is lying about it more and more and more, and then at the very end it just shoots way up. Yeah, you should run that ad on literally every television because it's true.
Yep. Although I think the Trump campaign could have some hay about Biden seeming fairly incoherent in recent interviews about coronavirus, but yeah, that should not stop them from obviously doing the right thing and criticizing Trump.
Yeah.
Totally ill-prepared response to the crisis and the constant lies, PR messaging and the car salesman hackery. He wants to have people go to large congregations on Easter Sunday, which is in a matter of weeks when this is going to be reaching its fever pitch. God, he's an idiot.
I mean, he should have them go on Palm Sunday so that way they're sick and die on Good Friday and can be resurrected and cured on Easter.
Yep. Okay, so this is terrible. As I am scrolling through Twitter, someone got this text message from their landlord. This is Whitaker Properties. Your rent is due on the 1st of the month. We are not giving any discounts or help. It is up to you to find a new job if you're affected by layoffs. If you do not feel you can get a job, then we suggest you move out.
Yeah,
that's
Leonard French of the Lawful Masses YouTube channel had a video about an eviction, not about a letter saying something very similar to its tenants, and my landlord. I've seen posters out in different places where they're. I think poster is the right word. Just saying, hey, we realize that everyone's affected by the coronavirus, and if you need any help, please give us a call and we'll talk about it. And, yeah, not all landlords are that heartless, but some are.
Yeah, it's like it's really horrible. Like if you have that antagonistic a relationship to the people that you're supposed to be serving, like, God, go fuck yourself. Like.
So, yeah, I think we're in agreement that the remaining prompts are pretty good, but will remain until next time.
Yeah. Okay.
Definitely lots of good material for the next time. time we do this. And plenty of good material for editing together. And, coming up with some good things for YouTube and with automatic. So,
Dr. Anthony Fauci, we are in the escalating phase of a very serious pandemic. That is a fact. We have got to realize that and to prepare and respond. The coronavirus is not under control.
Yeah. I guess so we're done with I guess our arguments. So I'll kind of wrap things up. I do have one idea for something that would be we don't really have that much of an audience, so it doesn't really matter that much. But I was thinking it might be kind of fun to just shout out any particular since things are being disrupted so much with the pandemic and everything being shut down, just to shout out anything that any creators or causes or cool things that we found out about that we want to support. So I'll go first, since this was my idea and you guys haven't had a minute to think about it. But all right, so yeah, that's it for our show. But I just wanted to shout out a few things. So I'm a big blues fan. You heard me argue for a blues song earlier in the show, and there's the closures for coronavirus are really affecting especially anyone in the entertainment business, anyone who has a job where they need to be somewhere where people congregate in order to make a living, and of course musicians are really affected by that. So I would a few charities that I've supported that I think would be good to look at in this time include the Blues Foundation has set up a coronavirus emergency relief fund to help with musicians who are having trouble paying things like rent and medical bills during this time. And they also have the Heart Fund, which is an ongoing fund to help struggling musicians pay medical bills. There's the Music Maker Relief Foundation, which provides support to a number of poor and elderly blues musicians. And also, if you want to support musicians more generally, the Recording Academy that's put on the Grammys has created a coronavirus relief fund through Music Cares. And as far as other cool stuff, I recently found out about a new Facebook group called Can't Stop the Blues that I think is a really cool idea. They are streaming live blues shows pretty much every day at 9 p.m. Eastern, and you can do free will donations to help support the artists, and that's on Facebook, Can't Stop the Blues, and the videos are on Facebook Live. So that's a really cool thing that people are doing to both help musicians who are struggling and to give people who are quarantined some fun entertainment. And also there's a lot of other musicians that are doing interesting live streams, the Tedeschi Trucks Band is streaming old concerts. Samantha Fish, Larkin Poe, they're all doing little things on YouTube and Facebook. So support all them, and also any other creators that you're YouTubers that are doing stuff, consider donating to their Patreon. Local businesses, consider ordering things for pickup or delivery, or buying gift cards or stuff. But yeah, there's obviously there's a lot of people struggling, and it's good to help keep the things that you care about going through this difficult time.
So I'll call out a couple things. The disc golf community is hit really, really hard by coronavirus because a lot of disc golfers have to make their money by traveling around and playing in tournaments. And no tournaments are going on right now, obviously, because they can't have the big public gatherings. So if you're a disc golfer or you're a fan of disc golf, I know a lot of times when we buy discs, we don't like to necessarily buy the Tour Series discs. They're a little bit more expensive. But if you can spare the extra money to buy that Tour Series disc, just know that, hey, some of that money is going back to that player, and they really need this right now since they can't tour and they can't go play, and they have bills like the rest of us. And if a small way we can help them out is by spending $5 more on a disc that we want to buy the one that we know they're going to get some of the profit from, then do that. Or if you have creators you like to support on Patreon and you've never supported them on Patreon and you do have some extra money, this would be a good time to support any creator you like on YouTube or you like to watch. So, like, I support Joe Mez Productions because they have the highest quality disc golf production, like disc golf videos on YouTube. I support CGP Great Hello Internet, a few other creators, and if this is a time where you've never been on Patreon before, but you're thinking about getting into it, or you're already a patron, but you think that you've been wanting to maybe increase your donation, this would be a perfect time to do that, especially for a channel like Joe Mez Pro, where they're not going to have as much content to put on their channel, and they have to make a lot of their money by traveling around and filming these tournaments, and they're not going to be able to do that for the foreseeable future. Maybe for the rest of the season, who knows? Who knows how long this pandemic is going to last? And I also bought one of their signature discs. I ordered it from them because it was like, yeah, it was $20, and I wouldn't usually spend $20 on a disc, but this is a time where they need that because their main stream of revenue has been cut off. And something that has been going around recently that I think everybody should do if you can is, if you have a local store that you really like to go to that has had to close down, like for me, like Love Garden, the record store, or say in Lawrence, or you have a local restaurant that you really like, order a gift card from that restaurant and then go use that gift card when they can actually open again. Like, support them in some way. Like, even if you can't go eat there, you can at least get the gift card. And I know there are a lot of charitable firms right now that are matching gift card donations. So find one of those, buy one to a store you like going to, and have that so that you'll have it when the pandemic is over, and you'll be supporting that place that you really enjoy, that you want to be able to go back to when all of this ends. So yeah, that's what I have. And call your family, call your friends, check in on them, check in on people. Like right now, nobody can go. Everybody can't do things that they want to do right now, and if we all just have to be completely alone, we will go insane. So, like, do your best to always check in on everybody.
Yeah.
I know nobody other than the three of us is going to hear this, but in case somebody does, I wanted to get that message in there.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, and definitely write a nice note or give a call to your grandma.
Yeah, I mean, I called my grandparents the other day to see how they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's see. I have some scattered thoughts here, which I've tried to collect as Ben and Zach were giving their recommendations. The Bernie Sanders campaign has been urging its supporters to donate to several organizations that help out people affected by the coronavirus outbreak. I'm going to name a few of them, but the Sanders campaign has a longer list. I think 14 charities which they have identified. The first 5 which they identified are Meals on Wheels, which delivers prepared food to seniors all across the country. No Kid Hungry, that makes sure children get food that they need, especially since schools are closed in many parts of the country, if not the entire country. The Restaurant Workers Community Foundation COVID-19 Emergency Relief Fund provides financial support to restaurant workers who are out of work. The National Domestic Workers Alliance gives financial support to in-home care workers, nannies, and house cleaners who have to stay home and not work. One Fair Wage Emergency Fund gives funds directly to service workers affected by the pandemic, including restaurant, salon, airport, rideshare, and gig economy workers who find themselves out of work or without customers. Now, there are lots of people and industries who require face-to-face interactions who are out of work. Obviously, if you're struggling to make ends meet or worried that you might be struggling to make ends meet by the end of this crisis, your well-being is more important than parting with the funds that you need more yourself.
Yeah.
Not asking anyone to donate who is not in a position to do so. There is a website, Project N95, which is a platform that connects healthcare providers who need personal protective equipment with manufacturers who can meet the demand. A representative from the website was interviewed on Chris Hayes' MSNBC program. I think they're doing some very helpful and interesting work. I don't know if they are taking donations, but they're certainly a service to look into because there is an upcoming shortage of that type of equipment for doctors and nurses across the country. And I will reiterate Zach's point that supporting creators on YouTube or podcasts that you frequent, and it's a good idea to support those if you have the means to do so at any time during a time when those services are particularly helpful for entertaining and occupying the time of those who are stuck indoors. That is a valuable service during a pandemic. So people don't just get bored and stir crazy and run out of things to do. So yeah, there's definitely lots of opportunities to help out and pitch in during this time if you have the money and desire to do so.
All right. So yeah, there's.
And I want to call out one more thing.
Oh yeah.
Ben Gibbard, who is the lead singer of Death Cab for Cutie, for the last 6 or 7 days, has been streaming concerts from his home studio, and he's taking a lot of requests, and he's doing his best to make them as entertaining as possible. So go check out those videos because they're really well done, and he's also during his videos supporting charities that matter to him and explaining those to everybody else, and it's really good stuff. Go check it out.
Yeah.
So I think before we close, I guess there are just a couple other things I think are interesting. Ben, you can cut these out if you don't want them in. But for the love of God, do not listen to what Donald Trump says.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, but don't abide by it as if he's a reliable source, because he is not.
Yeah.
Listen to the health experts, and if he fires the health experts, abide by what the experts say anyway. I mean, if Trump says go outdoors, everything's fine, you cannot trust his judgment. On YouTube, they have a link to the CDC's website with the hope that that will be a reliable source of information compared to what some of their videos might have. But on the CDC's website, it says at the top, the president's 15-day plan to combat coronavirus. That 15-day plan is way too short of a time frame compared to what most public health experts are saying. The CDC guidance is being filtered through the Trump administration, which is totally unreliable. Now, thus far, I mean, the public health experts are still allowed to talk from the CDC, and the CSUC website is one of the better sources of information, particularly for those who dislike the mainstream media for whatever reason, but it's listen to the experts, and Trump is not an expert.
Yeah, definitely. And also, like, one other thing to add, and I know this isn't really anything I need to tell anyone who might actually listen to this podcast, because all the people who would are very nice people, but yeah, just whenever you're interacting with other people, like, you know, at the grocery store, or you have to conduct some business over the phone, just be nice and patient, because they're dealing with a lot of shit right now.
And if you can, if you have somebody deliver something to your house, because my direction is always, hey, ring the doorbell to let me know that you're here.
Mm-hmm.
Is I'll try to get there as quick as I can, and so I can, like, I'll give them time to, like, walk back away from my house, but I want to always shout out a thank you to them if you can, because those people are forced to go out and, like, possibly expose themselves to other people because their jobs are deemed essential, whereas a lot of us get to stay home. So, like, if you can, be kind, but also properly socially distance at the same time. It is possible. Yeah. You just have to give them the distinct instruction to, like, hey, ring my doorbell so I know that you're here. But I also live in a small enough half-house apartment that I can do that, which helps.
All right. Well, yeah, so that's all good stuff to consider, and yeah, thanks for listening. I mean, if you listen to all of this, you've done your part to support us, and you're an amazing person. Like, holy shit, wow, that's amazing. So yeah, this will be up at zachandben.podomatic.com and on my YouTube channel at Blues DJ Ben. So yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll argue about dumb crap for you again sometime else.
Yeah.